Chapter 1. The Setup. Captain. Arthur Hastings had always believed the English seaside to be a thoroughly wholesome thing. Bracing air, respectable promenades, and an honest horizon that concealed nothing. On the afternoon the March Charity Ball opened its polished doors at the Royal Imperial Hotel on the cliff above Seabridge. He revised that opinion. It was a handsome hotel, to be sure, the sort of place where titled visitors wrote postcards in a palm court, and the porters knew the names of dogs as well as their masters. Yet there is a moment before any festive evening when the Polish lies too bright upon the surface, and the whole appears to require only the faintest breath to reveal an older, darker wood beneath. Hastings pressed a hand to the new stiffness of his collar and studied the foyer as guests drifted in. Lanterns had been strung along the inner balcony, and scarcely moved in the stillness. Footmen carried crates of champagne into the anteroom on the left, past a gilt-framed notice announcing the March Charity Ball under the patronage of Lady Evelyn March in aid of the Seabridge Sailors' Widows' Fund programme, 8 o'clock. Grand Polonaise, 8:20. Waltz, Blue Hills, 8:40. Foxtrot, Spring, in town, 9 o'clock. Waltz, Moon by the Water, 9:20. Tango, midnight. 9:40. Waltz, Empress. 10. Interlude. The neat columns, the careful times. Hastings, who was inclined to regard order as a symptom of decency, found it all reassuring. His eye returned to the clock above the concierge's desk. 20 minutes to 8. "You're early, Captain," observed the concierge, a spare man with silver hair and the kind of precise smile that belonged on a knife. "Lady March is particular about punctuality, but you have outdone even her ladyship." "I have been warned," said Hastings cheerfully. "Our hostess keeps the waltzes marching to time." "Indeed," said the man, "only—" He hesitated. "Only the clock in the ballroom has developed a temperament. It has been 5 minutes behind all afternoon. The manager has called for a mechanic. Alas, the fellow is dancing attendance on a bridge somewhere outside town." "Well," said Hastings, "if one must be late, better to have a whole ballroom in error than a single guest." "Have they tuned the orchestra?" "Mr. Ashbury arrived with them at 6:30 and has been intolerable ever since," said the concierge with faint relish. "The maestro claims the parquet floor is too recently waxed, and he has demanded more chalk. The porter swears he saw him mark something on the corner of the dais with his baton, as if he were measuring the distance from his own genius to the first violin." Hastings laughed and made a mental note. The sort of trifle Poirot would call the small fact that sits down quietly in a corner and refuses to leave. It was nonsensical to think so, he told himself. He was merely primed for observation by a recent letter in which his old friend had written, "Do not neglect the little things, mon ami. They grow into big things when no one attends to them." Hastings had put the letter away in his pocketbook with a smile, and had not expected to be attending to anything more serious than stale sandwiches. A rustle and a rush of scent marked the entrance of Lady Evelyn March, tall and white-haired, whose stillness, like an upward stroke of chalk on slate, seemed to set everyone else in motion. She wore an ivory gown and a string of pearls that made even the chandeliers take notice. Beside her trotted her companion, Mrs. Beatrice Glenn, whose round eyes gave her a perpetually startled look, as if honesty came upon her like a series of small gusts. "Hastings, my dear boy." Lady March's voice had the decisive music of a military band. "You shall lead the Grand Polonaise, no arguments." "A soldier ought to set the step. I am honoured," said Hastings, bowing. "If only the step will agree to be led." Lady March smiled in a way that suggested steps generally did as they were told. "We expect a most brilliant evening. Sir Basil Carruthers is bringing that tiresome niece of his, the pretty one who thinks men invented attention for her benefit, and Mr. Archer Montague has threatened to outbid himself at the auction. If he does, I shall forgive him his newspaper." "Montague," said Hastings, surprised. "The Montague?" "Of course the Montague," said Lady March crisply. "There is only one at a time, thank heaven. He has taken the West Suite and sent word that he will favour us by arriving just before the Polonaise. Do look at the flowers. The hotel wished to place palm fronds everywhere, as if we were in Cairo. I told them Seabridge is an English town and does not approve of foliage that cannot survive salt wind." She glanced towards the staircase. "Ah, Edgar!" "The manager, mister." Edgar Whitelaw came down with the smoothness of a man who had long ago decided that movement must never be noticed. He was short and trim, and wore a carnation whose red looked almost indecent against the black satin of his lapel. "Lady March," he murmured, bowing. "Captain Hastings." "See that the orchestra begins at the stroke of 8, said Lady March. "We shall not have any of those continental delays that pretend to be sophistication." Mr. Whitelaw's eyes flicked upwards to the foyer clock, then rightward towards the closed doors that led to the ballroom. Hastings saw the calculation cross his face and vanish, as a cloud might pass over the sea and leave no stain. "But of course," he said. Guests arrived with punctual frivolity, trailing laughter like ribbons. Sir Basil Carruthers appeared first, pink and portly, one of those men whose money announces itself in his waistcoat before his name has time to catch up. On his arm drifted Miss Iris Leaven, a slim, dark-eyed beauty whose mouth had the settled curve of discontent that men mistake for mystery. "My dear Lady March," boomed Sir Basil, "we cannot stay late. Iris finds late nights so fatiguing. But we insisted on making our bow. Iris, you are to be charming. I should be charming if anyone would only deserve it," Iris murmured. Then, catching sight of Hastings, she let a brighter expression slide into place. "Or if Captain Hastings will dance with me." "With pleasure," said Hastings, a little pink himself. "I claim the first waltz after the polonaise." "Do," she said. "I am certain you keep time." Behind them came Lieutenant Miles Renton in dress uniform with the look of a young man who has not yet learned to see the trap after the bait has been taken. He greeted Lady March with a mixture of zeal and dread, and then paused, glancing towards the stair. Hastings followed his gaze and saw a fair girl in pale green descend slowly. Miss Charlotte March, Lady Eveline's grandniece. She had that delicate, serious beauty which appears to pay no mind to its own effect and is all the more dangerous for it. "Ah, the child," said Lady March under her breath. "She has promised me a sensible evening. We shall see Dr. Lionel Rathbone arrived in the wake of a faint medicinal odour, and carried himself with the self-possession of a man accustomed to issuing certificates that no one cared to question. He greeted Lady March as an old friend, frowned at Mr. Whitelaw's carnation as if it were a symptom, and drifted towards the ballroom with his hands behind his back, already diagnosing the parquet. Madame Celestine, the dance instructress engaged to lead the bows and flourishes of the polonaise, appeared with the brisk walk of a little general. Her accent, somewhere between Brussels and Bond Street, charmed everyone and convinced nobody. She pressed a perfumed hand upon Hastings's sleeve and declared herself ravi to have a captain in the line of her march, then swept onward in a gust of starch. Last, as if the floor itself belonged to him, and were tired of waiting, Mr. Julian Ashbury strode from the ballroom, thin as a baton, his hair brushed back to a severe point. "Lady March," he said, bending over her hand, "the acoustics are tolerable if one is careful to stand half a foot forward of the dais. I have chalked the spot. I beg your guests to drift no further than the 6th row of chairs during crescendos. We shall begin with a brisk polonaise. If any gentleman fancies himself a drum, he must be forcibly restrained." "My guests may fancy what they please," said Lady March, "but they do not beat time unless I request it." Hastings, who had enjoyed the exchange, made his way through the anteroom and into the ballroom itself. Here the air had a different quality, cooler and sharper, as if the sea had slipped in through the long windows and left its taste upon the gilt. The floor shone like a lake at dusk. Banners hung from the gallery, and at the far end a small stage had been set, up for the orchestra, whose instruments lay ready in quiet nests. A violinist plucked a string and scowled at it. The drummer tapped a rim and listened to the note return from the ceiling. At the edge of the dais, just where Ashbury had indicated, Hastings saw a pale dusting of chalk like a ghostly footprint, and beneath it, as if deliberately aligned, a rectangle of lighter wood in the parquet, a repair, perhaps, or a panel. He tilted his head. A panel near the dais was not an impossibility. Older hotels had all manner of contrivances. He ran a finger along the join. The wax clung in a fine line. When he withdrew his hand, a sharp scent caught him. Not polish, something cool and sweet like peppermint. One of the footmen passed with a tray of champagne coupes and a stack of dance cards with pencils attached by thin silver strings. Hastings took a card and turned it over. The times were printed neatly, columns awaiting names. He wrote Iris Leaven in the 8:40 line and felt absurdly like a schoolboy peeking over a desk to see if the teacher had seen. "Captain Hastings," said a voice behind him, hard and agreeable at once. "You appear determined to be organised." He turned to see Mr. Archer Montague, newly arrived and already possessed of the room, as if possession were his simplest habit. Montague's face had that handsome, dangerous quality that certain actors and certain duellists share. His mouth was a blade disguised as a smile. He wore a grey waistcoat and a black pearl tie pin. In his right hand, with almost childish incongruity, he held a silvered lozenge case. "Mr. Montague," said Hastings, "your reputation precedes you." Montague laughed without warmth. "It will have trouble catching up if I move briskly enough." He tapped the lozenge case. "Do you dance, Captain? Or do you merely write in advance to ensure a partner?" "I do both," said Hastings, amused. "The evening belongs to punctuality, it seems." "Then it belongs to me," said Montague. He slipped a lozenge into his mouth, and that cool, sweet scent returned. "Punctuality is the only virtue that knows how to spend money." Lady March's voice sailed into the room, clear and carrying. "Places for the Grand Polonaise. Mr. Ashbury, if you please." Chairs shuffled. Gloves whispered. The orchestra lifted their instruments and released the first brisk sweep of sound. Madame Celestine trotted to the front like a small ship cutting ripple, and Hastings found himself paired with Miss Charlotte March. Lieutenant Renton, with a look of doomed bliss, was left to Iris, who seemed to regard the arrangement as either fate or entertainment. "Do not look so alarmed," Charlotte said softly, and Hastings noticed that though her face was pale, her eyes were steady. "Madame Celestine believes in terror as a method, but she seldom bites." "I have been assured of worse," said Hastings, and they were off. Forward, bow, step, turn, the long snake-like line of couples tracing patterns upon the lake-bright floor. The music rose and fell like a wind in clean rigging. As they passed the dais, Hastings saw Ashbury half a foot forward of his chalk mark, his expression one of grievance with Providence. The manager stood at the far doors, glancing now and again at the ballroom clock, whose minute hand, Hastings observed, lagged obstinately behind the pace of the music. At the end of the figure, applause touched the air like rain. The couples broke and reformed. Champagne sang in glasses. The ballroom became, all at once, a small city with its own laws. One moved, one spoke, one pretended to hear over the waltz, one pretended not to see what one had plainly seen. Hastings, who had seen more of life than he liked to remember, recognised the old rhythm. Balls were as honest as battlefields. Every smile had its manoeuvre. He found himself, for a moment, on the margin of the dance, near a tall potted bay tree by the French windows that overlooked the dark lawn to the sea. The left-hand window had a finer sheen upon its latch, as if it had been recently polished. The right-hand window bore a faint smear near the lock, a diagonal mark, perhaps a careless thumb. Beyond the glass, a single lantern glowed on the terrace, making a circle of moths. "Captain," Mr. Whitelaw materialised at his elbow with courteous soundlessness. "A message for you." He proffered a small envelope of hotel stationery. "Delivered from the London post at 6:30. I took the liberty of waiting until the first dance began." Hastings recognised the neat foreign hand before he tore the flap. The note was brief. "Mon ami, if you're at liberty to remain by the sea for a day or two, do so. I may have an errand that requires a clear eye and a friend who is as honest as an English sunset." H.P. Hastings could not help smiling. He folded the note into his pocket-book. "Thank you, Mr. Whitelaw. I shall be at liberty." The waltz began, Blue Hills, with that melting quality by which even sensible men permit themselves to feel younger. Hastings led Iris onto the floor. She danced with practised ease, head inclined just enough to suggest intimacy, eyes half-lidded as if she kept some better invitation in reserve. "You are light as a feather," Hastings said truthfully. "I am light as smoke," she returned, and just as inclined to drift in the wrong direction. "An alarming metaphor," she smiled. "Ask Sir Basil. He thinks I drift towards trouble by habit." They swept past Montague, who danced with Lady March herself, the contrast pleasingly odd. The predator obliged to bow to the Queen. Montague's face, attentive and ironic, altered when he glanced away. For a heartbeat he was himself, and Hastings saw a hardness there like winter glass. Then it was gone, and the lozenge case gleamed again in his hand as he reached for his pocket between figures, polished by a lifetime of being opened and shut. When the waltz ended, Madame Celestine clapped her hands with small peremptory snaps. "Bravo! Now the foxtrot. Please keep to the programme. You are English. You must adore the programme." Hastings surrendered Iris to a smiling banker and stepped aside to catch breath. He saw Dr. Rathbone in earnest conversation with Mrs. Glenn. The doctor's fingers moved in small, precise cuts through the air, as if he were trimming an invisible hedge. Miss Charlotte stood near the bay tree with Lieutenant Renton, whose flush suggested either devotion or champagne. Mr. Ashbury's baton carved sharp loops. He scowled at the drummer again. The ballroom clock read 8:20. Hastings' watch said 25 past. A fine evening, he thought, and paused. The sweet, cool scent of peppermint reached him again, not from Montague's case this time, but faint and diffuse, as if it had been breathed upon the air. He looked down. The chalk by the dais had smeared further. A heel had passed over it, leaving a small crescent, delicate as a thumbnail moon. Near the chalk, on that paler rectangle of wood, lay a single pearl, no bigger than a tear. Hastings bent to pick it up. It was cool in his palm and heavier than his mind had prepared to admit. He straightened and turned, meaning to inquire of Mr. Whitelaw whether any lady had reported a loss. Before he could move, the French window on the right rattled faintly in its frame. He glanced towards it. The latch sat at a slight angle, neither fully fastened nor honestly unlatched. "Captain Hastings," said a voice just behind his shoulder, Lady March. "Do not look so serious. One might almost suppose you had discovered a plot. Only a pearl, Lady March." He showed it to her. "Dropped in the wrong place at the right time." Lady March took the pearl, her eyes sharpening. "Beatrice," she called, and Mrs. Glenn came scurrying. "Send word to the ladies' retiring room that no one is to panic, and that anyone missing a pearl should report at once to Mr. Whitelaw. And do ask him to have the French window latch corrected. The sea is forever poking its nose in where it is not invited." Mrs. Glenn hurried away, relief at being told what to do lighting her step. "Thank you, Captain," said Lady March. "You're as useful as you are ornamental." Hastings bowed. The orchestra swept into the tango whose dark thread bound the couples closer. Montague stood for a moment aside, his head bowed as if counting a private beat. Then he tucked the lozenge case away and selected a partner with careless accuracy, Miss Charlotte, leaving Lieutenant Renton with both hands and no steps. Hastings felt a flicker of pity for the young officer, then dismissed it. Balls had their petty cruelties. Yet, he could not have said why. The sight of Montague's hand on the girl's waist troubled him. Something in the gesture was both protective and proprietary, as if he intended to purchase the air she breathed. He moved to the edge of the floor and idly examined the printed programme again. At the bottom of the card, in small type, was a line he had not noticed. "Special waltz at 9 o'clock. The Empress Waltz, arranged by J. Ashbury." Hastings' eye returned to the ballroom clock and to his watch. 5 minutes discrepancy. It was nothing, of course. Yet when the future insists on arriving by schedule, 5 minutes may become a door no one remembers leaving ajar. He glanced once more at the chalked mark, the faint smear on the French window's latch, and the pearl that had gone off to the manager's safe. He did not know it, but the evening had already begun to turn, and the Royal Imperial, polished, respectable, full of light, waited quietly for the one small step that would send everything sliding. Chapter 2. The crime. The evening had slipped forward in orderly fashion, though Hastings could not shake the sense of tension that hovered just beyond the light. Each dance began on time according to the printed programme, yet the discrepancy of the ballroom clock persisted like a quiet lie. The orchestra played with vigour, Ashbury stabbing the air with his baton, every inch the martinet of music. Guests moved, laughed and glittered, champagne sparkled. But beneath the sheen, small oddities collected like grit beneath a pearl. At 9 o'clock precisely by Hastings' watch, though the ballroom clock lagged stubbornly behind, the couples took their places for the Empress Waltz, composed and arranged by Mr. Ashbury himself. There was an air of ceremony to it. Lady March led the floor with Doctor. Rathbone, Iris Leven swayed upon Sir Basil's arm with a look of faintly amused boredom, and Montague swept Charlotte March away from her sulking lieutenant with the ease of a man accustomed to possession. Hastings found himself with Mrs. Glenn, whose round eyes widened at every turn as though dancing were a continual revelation. The waltz began with a bold sweep of strings. Ashbury's face was rigid with concentration, his eyes darting toward the dais floor as if the chalk mark there mattered more than the violinist's bow. Hastings guided Mrs. Glenn through the first turns, yet his attention roved. He noticed once again the French windows at the far end of the room, one latch crooked, one straight. They rattled faintly when the sea wind pressed against them, though the night beyond was still. The couple swirled. Montague lifted Charlotte almost off her feet with the force of his steps, a silver glimmer flashing as he snapped open his lozenge case between figures. The peppermint scent wafted afresh into the air. Hastings frowned at the incongruity of the gesture. Who attends to sweets in the middle of a dance? Yet Montague's expression was full of confidence. He popped the lozenge into his mouth and spun Charlotte with a precision that drew admiring glances. At the third repetition of the theme, Hastings felt Mrs. Glenn stumble. He caught her arm. "My dear madam! It is not I," she whispered, startled. "Look!" Across the circle Montague had faltered. At first it seemed a misstep, a heel caught in wax. He staggered, recovered, and even laughed, but the laugh broke. His face twisted, strangely, horribly, as if some inward machinery had gone wrong. He pressed a hand to his throat. The music rushed on, relentless. Charlotte gave a cry. Montague's knees buckled. He lurched sideways, crashing against the polished floor with a sound that split the gaiety like a pane of glass struck by a stone. The orchestra stumbled to a halt, boughs screeching against strings, as the room erupted in exclamations. Iris gasped. Sir Basil puffed indignantly. Dr. Rathbone dropped Lady March's hand and bent over the fallen man with the assurance of his profession. "Stand back! Give him air!" But even as he spoke, the truth was evident. Montague's eyes were glassy, his lips blue-tinged. His breath rattled once, caught, and ceased. The silver lozenge case rolled from his fingers and spun across the parquet, striking the pale rectangle near the dais before coming to rest. Charlotte stood rigid, her face drained of all colour. Lieutenant Renton rushed to her side, glaring wildly as though the very air were guilty. Lady March raised her hand, her voice like a whip across panic. "Silence! No one is to leave. Mr. Whitelaw, close the doors at once." The manager obeyed, his face bloodless but composed. Footmen hurried to the windows, securing the latches. A strange stillness followed, as though the sea itself held its breath against the glass. Dr. Rathbone knelt, performing brisk examinations. At last he straightened, his expression grave. "He's gone," he said quietly. "I cannot say more without proper instruments. But this was no apoplexy, Lady March. The seizure was too sudden. There is every indication of—" He hesitated, glanced at the lozenge case glinting on the floor. "Of poison." A murmur swept through the ballroom like wind through reeds. Hastings stooped to retrieve the case before some nervous guest trampled it. The silver felt warm in his hand, smooth from habitual handling. He snapped it open. Inside lay 4 neat lozenges, pale discs faintly dusted with sugar. He held it out to Dr. Rathbone, who sniffed cautiously. "Peppermint," the doctor said, then frowned. "But something else. A bitterness beneath. I shall need proper reagents to be certain." Lady March's eyes flashed. "Then until you are certain, Doctor. Rathbone, no one leaves this hotel. Mr. Whitelaw, see that the exits are guarded. The police must be called at once. Yes, Lady March." The manager inclined his head and signalled a footman. The man hurried away. The guests had gathered in uneasy knots, voices low and urgent. Iris Leven dabbed her lips with a handkerchief, murmuring that she had always disliked peppermint. Sir Basil blustered about scandal and expense. Mrs. Glenn wrung her hands, whispering of God's judgment. Madame Celestine cried out in shrill French about the ill luck of interrupted music. Charlotte stood motionless, Renton's hand upon her arm. Hastings, watching her, thought she looked less shocked than dazed, as if some private fear had risen up to confront her at last. The silence was broken by the sound of firm, measured footsteps. All heads turned. Into the ballroom, his small figure neat and precise against the great doors, walked Hercule Poirot. He wore his overcoat buttoned to the throat, his moustaches gleaming, his eyes sharp, greenish, cat-like, taking in every detail at once. "Messieurs, mesdames," he said, bowing slightly, "I beg pardon for the intrusion. I arrived but an hour ago to enjoy the sea air, yet it appears that fate, she has again arranged my holiday for me." He looked down at Montague's body, then at Hastings, and gave a small nod. "You see, mon ami, why I wrote to you." Hastings stared. "Poirot, by Jove, you are here! But how?" My little grey cells, they warned me, Poirot said softly. And now, alas, we have death at a dance. A man who takes a peppermint and falls upon the floor. Dead. A curious thing, n'est-ce pas? He bent delicately and lifted the silver case from Hastings' hand. Turning it over, he examined the hinge, the clasp, the faint smears along its edge. He raised it to his nose and sniffed with fastidious distaste. Ah, yes. I think already we perceive the outline of a problem most subtle Lady March, recovering her imperious tone, demanded, Monsieur Poirot, you will assist us? Poirot inclined his head gravely, but naturally, madam. Until the police arrive, no one leaves. We are here together, enclosed. His eyes swept the gathered company. The shaken girl in green, the furious lieutenant, the grim doctor, the trembling companion, the scowling conductor, the fuming Sir Basil, the bored beauty Iris. And amongst us, Poirot said softly, there is one who has arranged this little tragedy with care. The sea beat faintly at the cliffs below. The chandeliers trembled in their sockets. Montague lay still upon the shining parquet, and in the silence that followed, the Empress waltz sheet fluttered from the music stand to the floor like a white flag surrendered. Chapter 3. The Arrival. The great ballroom of the Royal Imperial had never seemed so silent. Chandeliers glimmered above a floor that had moments before been alive with swirling skirts and polished shoes. Now it was a stage set in unnatural stillness, a tableau of frozen faces and a single figure lying prone upon the gleaming parquet. Poirot moved forward with the quiet certainty of a man for whom such scenes were neither new nor welcome. He knelt beside the body of Archer Montague with extraordinary care, his elegant fingers hovering over the stiffening form but never quite touching. His moustaches quivered faintly like antennae attuned to every nuance. Hastings, watching, felt the familiar mixture of reassurance and astonishment. Nothing escaped his friend's notice, yet he appeared to do so little. Dr. Rathbone, Poirot said gently, you've already rendered the pronouncement of death, yes? The physician inclined his head gravely. Indeed. The symptoms are unmistakable. He struggled for breath. The lips turned cyanotic. There is no doubt in my mind the man was poisoned. Whether through the lozenge or some other means that we must ascertain très bien, murmured Poirot. His gaze lingered on Montague's right hand, which still lay half-curled upon the floor. Observe, Hastings. See how the fingers point slightly inward, as though clutched about the case at the last. A natural contraction, but also perhaps the echo of the final act. Lady March, her pearl necklace unmoved even by tragedy, stood like a figure carved from ice. Monsieur Poirot, the guests are distraught. It is essential that we restore order. The police will be here presently. Poirot rose with a bow. You have great presence of mind, madame. Indeed, order is everything. His eyes flicked to the grand clock on the wall. Though it appears the time here is always a little disordered. He took from his pocket a small round watch and compared it, lips pursed. 5 minutes difference. Small, but sometimes the smallest discrepancy. It alters the world. Sir Basil Carruthers blustered, dabbing his damp forehead. I'll not be detained here all night for the sake of some blasted sweet. The fellow was always reckless. One might easily suppose it was some Eastern drug he fancied. Foreigners and their habits. Poirot's eyes sharpened. But monsieur, Mr. Montague was not foreign, and his lozenge case was English silver. Yet you speak so quickly of drugs. Curious Sir Basil flushed. I only meant... Well, dash it all. The man's death needn't detain us. It detains us all, Sir Basil, Poirot replied gravely, for none shall leave until we know more. That is both courtesy to the dead and safety for the living. Charlotte March stood pale and silent, her hands clasped tightly before her. Lieutenant Renton hovered protectively beside her, his jaw clenched. Poirot turned to them with the faintest smile. Mademoiselle, you danced with the unfortunate gentleman? She nodded, her voice low, a yes. He asked me before the Empress waltz began. I did not wish. She stopped, glancing toward her aunt. But one does not refuse such a man in public. Poirot inclined his head. You are most correct. And during the dance, did he say anything unusual? Charlotte hesitated. He spoke of time. That the ballroom clock could not be trusted. Then he laughed and took out his lozenges. Her voice faltered. He put one in his mouth. Moments later, She gestured helplessly toward the body. Merci, mademoiselle. That is of interest. Poirot's gaze shifted to Hastings. You also noticed the peppermint scent, mon ami? Hastings nodded. Yes, earlier in the evening as well. Bon. Poirot's moustaches twitched. It is well to confirm. The police arrived then, Inspector Graves, a tall, solid man with the air of one accustomed to the prosaic. He surveyed the grand ballroom with a mixture of awe and suspicion, bowed perfunctorily to Lady March, and immediately began asking brusque questions. Poirot stood back with folded arms, observing, his small head tilted like a bird considering a seed. Poison, eh? Said Graves after Rathbone's report. And you all swear he popped a sweet just before keeling over? He took the silver case, sniffed and grimaced. Peppermint. Wouldn't have thought it deadly. Poirot lifted one hand delicately. If you will permit, Inspector, poison can be subtle. Not the taste, not the scent, but the effect. His eyes gleamed. It is like music, yes? A discord heard only by the body, not the ear. Graves looked at him doubtfully. You've the reputation, Monsieur Poirot. If you'll lend us your assistance, I'd be glad of it, but we'll keep to procedure. Body stays put till the coroner arrives. No one leaves till we've names and addresses. Lady March gave a regal nod. You will have the fullest cooperation, but Inspector, understand this. The reputation of the March Charity Ball must not suffer. We cannot have wild rumours. Rumour thrives in silence, Lady March, Poirot said softly. Better to have clear truth, however uncomfortable. The guests were shepherded into the anteroom where chairs had been hastily arranged. They sat in uneasy clusters, whispering. Poirot, with Hastings at his side, began to move amongst them like a schoolmaster among fretful pupils. He asked no formal questions yet, only observed the twitch of Sir Basil's fingers upon his watch-chain, the restless tapping of Ashbury's baton upon his shoe, the nervous flutter of Mrs. Glenn's lace handkerchief, Iris Leven's languid smile that did not reach her eyes. Each gesture entered the detective's catalogue. At length Poirot seated himself beside Hastings. Regard them, mon ami, a circle complete. Each has his motive, his secret perhaps. Already I see shadows. You don't mean any one of them could have slipped poison into those lozenges, Hastings whispered. Poirot's gaze lingered on the silver case, now resting in Inspector Graves's possession. Anyone, or no one? For it is possible that Montague himself carried his own death in his pocket. Yet, I do not think so. He leaned closer, his voice low. Non, Hastings, this was arranged, carefully, too carefully. And do you recall the little pearl you discovered earlier? Already the story begins to tangle. Hastings caught his breath. You think the pearl's connected? Poirot's eyes shone. Tout à fait. One does not drop pearls and peppermint without reason. In the corner, Charlotte March sat very still, her gaze fixed on nothing. Lieutenant Renton leaned toward her, murmuring something urgent. She shook her head faintly. Poirot noted it, the small refusal, the tremor in her hand. He smiled inwardly. Soon, he said to Hastings, we shall begin to ask the questions. For the murderer is here, in this very room, and already he is afraid. Chapter 4. The questions begin. Inspector Graves had established his headquarters in the anteroom, where the scent of spilt champagne and the cloying perfume of wilting flowers clashed with the staleness of fear. The guests, huddled in uneasy silence, resembled a company of schoolchildren awaiting reprimand. Poirot, with his habitual delicacy, allowed the inspector the first sweep of authority. Only when the introductions and formalities had been completed did he lean forward, his fingertips steepled, and request permission to make a few supplementary observations. Graves, though wary, acceded with a grunt. Poirot rose, smoothed the lapel of his coat, and looked around the circle. We must begin, mes amis, by understanding what each of you saw and heard. Nothing is too small. It is in the detail that truth hides herself. His eyes fell upon Charlotte March. Mademoiselle, forgive me. Once more, you were dancing with Mr. Montague at the fatal moment. Charlotte inclined her head, pale but composed. Yes, he had just remarked on the ballroom clock being behind. Then he smiled, rather oddly, I thought, and opened his lozenge case. He offered me one. You refused? I said I did not care for peppermint. He laughed, said it was my loss, and took one himself. Almost at once he faltered. Très bien. And you noticed nothing unusual about the lozenge he placed in his mouth? It looked like the others. White-sugared Poirot's gaze shifted. Lieutenant Renton, you were near observing? Renton flushed. I saw him take something from his case, yes. And then he went down. That's all his eyes flicked to Charlotte. She had nothing to do with it. Poirot inclined his head gravely. Your loyalty does you credit, monsieur. But the truth, she is not loyal, she is impartial. We must all remember that he turned next to Iris Leven, whose languid poise was scarcely disturbed by tragedy. Mademoiselle, you danced with Captain Hastings at that time? Yes, she smiled faintly. We were just finishing when Montague collapsed. Everyone saw. It was very dramatic. You knew Mr. Montague well? Well enough? Her eyes slid towards Sir Basil. He was attentive, shall we say? But I make a rule never to accept lozenges from men who flatter too much. Sir Basil gave an indignant snort. Impertinent girl. Montague was a bounder. Everyone knew it. The man trafficked in scandal sheets, ruined reputations for profit. If someone did him in, I say good riddance. Ah, Poirot's eyes gleamed. Then you will allow, monsieur, there existed motive for many. Carruthers puffed. I never, well, naturally his enemies were legion. But to murder him here, at Lady March's ball, outrageous. Lady March's voice cut across, cool and decisive. The fact remains, gentlemen, that a guest has died in my ballroom. Until the truth is discovered, our honour is stained. Just so, Poirot agreed. We continue. Dr. Rathbone, you reached the victim first. Did you notice anything beyond the obvious symptoms? The doctor rubbed his chin. There was a faint odour upon his breath. Bitter, metallic, not peppermint alone. A powerful alkaloid, perhaps. Digitalis? Strychnine? Hard to say without analysis. And no trace of powder upon his lips. No granules. None visible. Poirot made a small note in his pocketbook. Merci. And you, Madame Celestine? You are mistress of the dance floor. You observe much. The dance instructress flung up her hands. Mon Dieu, I observe only disaster. He fall like a sack of potatoes. Poof! I think at first he make the comedy, the grand joke. But no, he is dead. I see nothing else. I swear it upon my art. Poirot regarded her steadily, then moved on. Mr. Ashbury, our conductor. You two stood close. Ashbury's lips tightened. I was directing my musicians, sir, not watching the dancers. Though I did notice Montague looked pale even before the collapse. If you ask me, he was unsound in constitution. Overindulgence, stimulants. He lived too fast. Poirot's moustaches twitched. It is possible. Yet his death was timed to the minute, was it not? At the very height of your Empress waltz. Ashbury gave an irritable shrug. Coincidence? Poirot let the word hang in the air before bowing slightly. We shall see. The questioning moved briskly through the remainder. Mrs. Glenn's flustered protests that she had seen nothing, only Hastings supporting her when she stumbled. Mr. Whitelaw's account of the pearl brought to him earlier, and of the window latch that would not sit straight. The footmen swearing they had touched no glass, no case. At length Poirot resumed his seat. You perceive, Inspector, we have learned a little. First, Montague carried the fatal lozenge himself. Second, he offered one to Mademoiselle Charlotte, which she refused. Third, there was already uneasiness about the clock, which he mentioned at the very instant. And fourth, Poirot paused delicately. There is the pearl. Graves frowned. You believe that trinket has bearing? I do. Poirot's eyes glinted. For it was dropped near the dais, by the chalk mark Monsieur Ashbury made. The very place where the lozenge case rolled. Two accidents? None. There is a design here, the inspector harumphed, unconvinced. But Hastings, who knew the tone, felt the stirrings of that peculiar certainty which always heralded the tightening of Poirot's net. Poirot rose once more and addressed the guests with gentle formality. Mesdames, Messieurs, until morning, none may depart. Rooms will be arranged. You will each remain available for further questions. And remember this, the murderer is among us. He thinks himself clever, but the truth, she is like the waltz. All steps lead back to the beginning. He bowed, and the silence deepened like a held breath. Chapter 5. The Red Herrings. By morning the Royal Imperial bore little resemblance to the glittering palace of the previous evening. The chandeliers remained lit, but their light seemed harsher now, showing corners of dust and weary faces. Guests moved about like restless ghosts, The rustle of gowns replaced by the shuffle of slippers. A pull hung in the air, made heavier by the whispered certainty that a murderer walked among them. Inspector Graves had installed himself in the manager's office, surrounded by files and the solemn authority of the law. His men had sealed the ballroom, though Poirot had secured permission to step within and examine the scene again. Hastings followed his friend across the polished floor, which still bore faint scuffs from the last dance. At the dais, the chalk mark was smudged into a crescent. Beside it, Poirot indicated the pale rectangle of parquet. "You see, mon ami," he said softly, "how it stands out from the surrounding boards." This panel was lifted and relayed. Recently. Why? It is not connected, perhaps, to the death itself. Yet one asks the question. Hastings bent, tapped the wood with his knuckles, and gave a faint hollow note. "You think something's hidden beneath? Or was hidden? But let us not chase two mysteries before we have solved one. For now, we content ourselves with noticing." They stepped back into the anteroom where Inspector Graves was concluding a brisk interview with Dr. Rathbone. "So you insist the poison was strychnine?" Rathbone looked affronted. "I said the symptoms were consistent, Inspector." Rigid limbs, spasmodic breathing, but without analysis. "Analysis?" Graves waved a hand. "The man's case contained lozenges. He put one in his mouth. He died. Straightforward enough. The question is, who tampered with his sweets?" All eyes turned to the silver case upon the desk, now sealed in a glassine envelope. Hastings thought it looked oddly innocent, like a child's toy under punishment. Graves's voice hardened. "Miss Leven, step forward if you please." Iris rose with feline languor, adjusting the drape of her gown. "Inspector, I fail to see why." "Because half the ballroom heard Montague was paying you particular attention," Graves interrupted. "You admit he pressed his company upon you. It wouldn't be the first time a woman slipped something into a fellow's pocket to rid herself of him." Gasps arose from the assembly. Sir Basil lumbered to his feet, outrage painted across his face. "That's monstrous, Inspector. Iris may be willful, but she's no poisoner." Poirot's small hand fluttered. "Let us not rush, mon cher Inspecteur. The young lady's character is not the point. Let us ask, did she have opportunity?" "She danced with Hastings, didn't she?" Graves snapped. "And earlier she was seen near Montague's chair, before the Empress waltz began." Opportunity enough. Iris's dark eyes flashed. "I assure you, Inspector, I went nowhere near his belongings. If Montague chose to kill himself with his ridiculous peppermints, that is his affair, not mine." Poirot studied her intently. "Mademoiselle, forgive the intrusion. Last night, did he offer you a sweet also?" "No, he knew better than to try. I dislike them." Her lips curved into a small, cold smile. "Everyone in Seabridge knows that." Graves scowled. "It's neat, too neat. Motive, opportunity, means. That'll satisfy a jury." Poirot's brows rose, moustaches bristling. "Non, non, non. You leap too fast, mon ami. It is perhaps too obvious. You see how easily the suspicion falls? It is like a stage set, arranged for our eyes, and when something is too easy, eh bien, I am suspicious." Hastings caught the gleam in his friend's eye. "You mean it's a trick? That someone planted the appearance of her guilt?" Poirot nodded. "Exactement. A red herring, as you English say." To distract from the true hand, Lady March's voice cut across the room, cold and commanding. "Then, Monsieur Poirot, I must insist you find the true hand quickly. I cannot have the reputation of my ball destroyed by scandalous conjecture." Poirot bowed gravely. "Rest assured, madam, I will. But the truth she must be courted, not coerced." Inspector Graves, though unconvinced, yielded to Poirot's calm authority. The company dispersed, though knots of whispers remained. Mrs. Glenn murmuring to Charlotte about God's punishments, Sir Basil puffing indignantly, Iris serene under a cloud of suspicion. Poirot turned aside to Hastings. "See, mon ami, how the net is cast. They would have us believe the young lady is guilty, but the murderer is cleverer than that. We must search elsewhere. Already I see inconsistencies. The clock that lags, the pearl that falls, the panel in the floor. They will speak given time," Hastings sighed. "But meanwhile the inspector is ready to clap the bracelets on Miss Lieven." Poirot smiled faintly. "That is the nature of red herrings, Hastings. They are very appetizing, until one realizes they do not satisfy the hunger. He adjusted his cuffs, his gaze sweeping once more over the uneasy company. No, mon ami, the truth is yet hidden. But soon she will come dancing out Chapter 6, a clue in detail. The storm broke in the small hours. Rain lashed against the high windows of the Royal Imperial, and the wind moaned down the cliff as though the sea itself were grieving. In the morning the air smelt sharp and clean, but inside the hotel the atmosphere remained heavy, charged with suspicion. No guest was permitted to depart, and by 10 o'clock the assembled company had the restlessness of caged birds. Poirot, immaculately turned out as ever, appeared entirely untroubled by the confinement. He took breakfast with Hastings in the lounge, fussing over the arrangement of his boiled egg and toast, and only when every crumb was correctly aligned did he begin to speak. "Hastings, there is one fact that dances before my eyes. A small thing, so small most men would dismiss it. Yet it is the key Hastings, who had spent the morning pondering the inspector's determination to charge Iris Livon, leaned forward eagerly. Out with it, old chap." Poirot lifted a finger. "The pearl. The pearl. Just so. It was discovered by you, near the dais, yes? And it was no ordinary bead. Did you note, Hastings, the weight of it?" Hastings frowned. "Now you mention it, yes, heavier than I expected." "Precisely. Because it was no mere ornament, it was real. An expensive jewel, dropped in the midst of a crowded dance floor. Does a lady lose such a thing and not notice? Does she not at once cry out? Yet none did. Instead, it was left there to be found." "That is curious." Hastings's brow furrowed. "You think it was planted?" "I think it was discarded, mon ami. Deliberately. But why?" Poirot tapped his egg spoon against the china with delicate precision. "It is linked, somehow, to Montague's death." Before Hastings could protest, Inspector Graves appeared, looking grim. "I've had the chemist's report on the lozenges," he announced. "One of them, only one, was soaked in strychnine. The others are ordinary peppermints." Poirot's eyes glinted. "Ah, that is most significant. It is not the case that all were tampered with, but a single sweet only. Then the hand that poisoned it must have known Montague would take it himself." "Or that he'd offer it to someone else," Graves growled. His gaze fell upon Charlotte March, seated apart by the window, pale and withdrawn. If she'd accepted, well, the conclusion's obvious. Hastings felt his heart twist. The girl looked so young, so fragile, her profile outlined against the rain-streaked glass. Poirot, however, leaned back and folded his arms. "Obvious, perhaps," he said softly, "but not correct. Tell me, Inspector, which sweet was poisoned? The one nearest the clasp, or deeper in the case?" Graves consulted the report. "The second from the top. Just so." Then the murderer had remarkable foresight, or remarkable opportunity. Consider. Montague habitually opened his case, offered it about. To ensure the poisoned sweet should come to his own lips required either chance or knowledge of his habits exact. And knowledge, Hastings, is a dangerous clue. Poirot rose suddenly, his gaze sharp. "Come, we must revisit the ballroom." The great room lay silent now, its splendour dimmed. Poirot moved with delicate steps across the parquet, pausing at the dais. He bent, examined again the pale rectangle of wood. From his pocket he produced a small penknife and eased the edge. To Hastings' astonishment, the panel lifted, revealing a shallow recess beneath. Within lay a square of folded paper and, astonishingly, a pair of opera gloves, cream-coloured, faintly scented with violet. Poirot drew them out with a flourish. "Observe, Hastings. A lady's gloves concealed here, and on the fingertips. What is that?" Hastings peered. "A faint smear. Looks like powder." Poirot nodded gravely. "Powder, indeed. And of a kind I know. Let us not say more until I confirm, but note, my friend, the detail. The gloves are a size small for delicate hands, and they were hidden here before Montague fell." Hastings stared. "Then the murderer prepared the stage beforehand?" Poirot smiled faintly. "The murderer is an artist, Hastings. He arranges, he disguises. But in arranging he leaves patterns, and patterns, they speak to me." He replaced the panel and slipped the gloves and paper into his pocket. "We must not show these yet, mon ami. Let the guilty one believe his secret still safe. Meanwhile, we watch, we listen, and we wait for the slip, the contradiction." As they turned to leave, A gust of wind rattled the French windows. Hastings noticed again the smear on the right-hand latch, faint but distinct. Poirot touched it lightly with his fingertip. "You see, Hastings?" Another small thing, a mark that should not be there. In all mysteries the truth is told twice, once by the mouth that lies, once by the object that cannot. It is our task to hear the latter. He straightened, eyes alight. "Come, mon ami, the dance is not yet done, but soon we shall hear the false step." Chapter 7. More Lies Surface. The long gallery outside the ballroom had become the uneasy promenade of suspects. Some paced, some sat in brooding silence, some whispered in corners. The usual morning bustle of a grand hotel was absent. No luggage rolled along the carpet, no chambermaids hummed at their work. It was as though the very building held its breath. Poirot advanced among them with an air of calm civility, yet his eyes flicked ceaselessly, missing nothing. Hastings trailed beside him, notebook in hand, feeling once more like a schoolboy permitted to observe a master at his craft. "Now, Hastings," Poirot murmured, "it is time we apply a little pressure. Truth hides behind politeness, but lies, they always leave a draught. One has only to open the right door. They began with Mrs. Glenn." The lady's round eyes were more bulging than ever, her fingers twisting a lace-edged handkerchief to shreds. "Madam," said Poirot gently, "you were beside Lady March when Montague collapsed. Tell me, before the dance began, did you notice him speak with anyone?" She hesitated, then blurted, "I did! He was in conversation with Mr. Whitelaw near the cloakroom. I thought nothing of it." But Mr. Whitelaw looked distressed. The manager, standing stiffly by the mantel, turned sharply. "That is absurd." "We spoke only of arrangements. The champagne supply." Poirot's eyes twinkled. "You're certain, monsieur? Nothing about the ballroom clock, for example?" Whitelaw paled. "Well, he did remark upon it, yes. Said it was symbolic of the town itself, always 5 minutes behind the times. A joke. Nothing more." Poirot inclined his head. "A joke, perhaps." He moved on to Sir Basil Carruthers, who was mopping his brow with a handkerchief already in tatters. "Monsieur," Poirot said, "last night you declared Montague a scoundrel. Had he threatened you in some manner?" Carruthers puffed. "Threatened? Ha! He was always hinting at printing scandal in his paper. Said he had documents about my business affairs. Nonsense, of course, but dashed unpleasant all the same. And if such documents existed," Carruthers's face grew purple, "then he deserved what he got. But I didn't poison the man. Dash it all." Poirot's voice remained mild. "You have never purchased peppermint lozenges?" "Lozenges? Certainly not. Yet the scent of peppermint clings faintly to your coat." Carruthers started, then laughed too loudly. Probably brushed against him. The fellow reeked of the stuff. Poirot let it pass with a small smile. "Bien, we continue." Next came Iris Levant. She received Poirot with a languid arch of the brow, her dark eyes cool. "You wish to accuse me again, Monsieur Poirot?" "Not accuse, mademoiselle. Understand. Tell me, why did Montague pursue you so insistently?" She laughed softly. "Because I was the one person who resisted him. Men always want what they are refused." Her expression sharpened. "Besides, he liked to make Sir Basil jealous. He said it was sport." "And were you jealous, Sir Basil?" Poirot asked mildly over his shoulder. Carruthers spluttered, but Iris's smile widened. "You see, monsieur?" He cannot even answer. Poirot noted the exchange, then turned to Charlotte March. She sat near the window, Lieutenant Renton at her side like a sentinel. Her face was pale, her hands tightly clasped. "Mademoiselle," Poirot said softly, "last night you refused a lozenge." "Why?" She lifted her eyes. "I never take sweets from strangers." "But Mr. Montague was not a stranger to you, I think." A flush rose to her cheeks. Renton bristled. "This is an outrage." "She owes no explanation," Poirot ignored him. "Charlotte, my child, forgive an old man his persistence." "Did Montague possess some knowledge that frightened you?" She shivered. He hinted he knew something about my family. About money owed. I didn't believe him." Poirot's moustaches quivered. "So, another secret." The final questioning fell upon Julian Ashbury, the conductor. He stood aloof, baton tucked under one arm like a sword at rest. "Monsieur," Poirot said, Your Empress waltz. Magnificent. Yet you placed great importance on the chalk mark before the dais. Why? Ashbury's nostrils flared. Acoustics. The sound is different half a foot forward. And yet the chalk mark lay precisely beside the parquet panel we have discussed. Did you know of its existence? Ashbury's eyes flickered too quickly. Of course not. I am a musician, not a carpenter. Indeed, said Poirot, his tone silky. Yet you noticed Montague's pallor before the collapse? Yes, he was pale. I thought it nerves. He had been boasting all evening of a great coup, something to be revealed at midnight. Perhaps that knowledge killed him more than poisoned Poirot's head tilted, like a bird catching a glint. A coup? Ah, Hastings, you hear? Always with murder there is talk of revelation, of secrets about to be told. It is most classic. Ashbury shrugged, retreating into hauteur. When the company was dismissed, Hastings turned to his friend. Well, Poirot, it seems everyone had some quarrel with the man. But what of the gloves you found? They could belong to any lady here, Poirot's eyes shone. Not to any. They are too small for Iris, too fine for Mrs. Glenn. They fit but one person in this company, and when I show them, the truth will begin to shake. He tapped his temple. But not yet, Hastings. For first, more lies must come to the surface. It is the way of human nature. Once the first falsehood is spoken, others follow. Soon they will contradict themselves, and then, boom, the whole edifice falls. Hastings shivered slightly. Outside the gallery the sea pounded against the cliff, relentless and cold, as though echoing Poirot's certainty. The little Belgian's eyes glowed with that peculiar light Hastings knew too well. The murderer was near, and the lies were beginning to unravel. Chapter 8. The Emotional Turning Point. By evening the guests of the Royal Imperial were near exhaustion. The day of confinement had worn their nerves thin. Polite conversation had given way to bitter silences, whispered accusations, and the occasional sharp outburst. The once sparkling ball gowns now seemed like costumes left too long upon unwilling players. Poirot chose this moment, when tempers were frayed and facades cracking, to summon them once more to the anteroom. Lady March presided stiffly from her chair, her face a mask of steel. Hastings stood to one side, his notebook ready. Poirot himself moved slowly, surveying each face in turn, his small hands folded behind his back. "My friends," he began softly, "we are no nearer liberty than last night. Yet I promise you this, the truth is not far. Only one thread more must be pulled, and the whole fabric will unravel. Let us speak again, calmly, but frankly." He turned first to Charlotte March. "Mademoiselle, forgive me. Yesterday you hinted Montague knew something of your family finances. Will you be more precise?" Charlotte hesitated. Lieutenant Renton's hand closed fiercely over hers, but she pulled it free and rose to her feet. Her voice trembled, yet it carried. "Yes, Montague threatened me. He said he had letters, proof that my late father had lost heavily to him in speculation, that our estate was mortgaged beyond rescue. He swore he would publish it in his paper unless I agreed to—" She broke off, colour surging painfully in her cheeks. The silence thickened. Poirot's gaze was steady, gentle. "Unless you agreed to marry him, perhaps," Charlotte bowed her head. "Yes," Renton leapt up. "The blackguard!" "I should have killed him myself," Poirot raised a hand. "Gently, mon cher. You see how truth begins to emerge. Montague's menace lay heavy on more than one heart. And yet, if he died, mademoiselle, you are freed. That is a motive, though not proof." Charlotte sank back into her chair, her eyes shining with unshed tears. Lady March's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. Poirot turned next to Sir Basil. "And you, monsieur? You told us Montague threatened exposure of your business affairs, but just now you allowed Iris Livon to hint the truth. He used her to taunt you. What else did you conceal?" Sir Basil blustered, but at length slumped, defeated. "Very well. He had me, fair and square. I speculated with money that wasn't mine. He said he'd print it unless I gave him a share in my shipping line. I paid him already. But he wanted more. His handkerchief mopped his face in frantic circles. That's all. I didn't poison him. I swear it. Ah, but you see, monsieur, again, motive." Poirot's eyes flicked toward Iris. "And you, mademoiselle, how long had you known Montague?" She smiled thinly. "Long enough to despise him. He pursued me because it annoyed Sir Basil. I endured it because it amused me, but I never touched his sweets." Poirot's voice sharpened, silk over steel. "Yet this morning the maid found in your dressing-case a fragment of paper, torn, from the same stock as that concealed with the gloves beneath the dais. How do you explain it?" For the first time Iris faltered. Colour drained from her cheeks. I don't know how it came there." Whispers flared around the room. Poirot held up a hand. "Attend!" Already the lies crumble. We are near the truth, but one piece remains. His gaze swung to Julian Ashbury. The conductor stood rigid, his baton clasped like a weapon. "You spoke yesterday of Montague boasting of a great coup to be revealed at midnight. How did you know this, monsieur? No one else has mentioned it." Ashbury's eyes flickered. "He told me. Said he would announce it between dances, that I was to strike a flourish on the drums to command attention." "And did he say what this revelation was?" Ashbury's jaw tightened. "He hinted it concerned Lady March's household. But he laughed when I pressed him. I thought it drunken, boasting." Poirot's moustaches twitched. "And yet you prepared a signal." Curious at this, Lady March's composure finally cracked. She rose to her feet, voice trembling with suppressed fury. "Enough! I will not have my household dragged through the mud. Yes, Montague had threatened us all. He lived by menace, but to suggest one of my guests, my family, stoop to poison—" Her words broke. For a moment she swayed, hand clutching at her pearls. Then, with an effort, she mastered herself. "Monsieur Poirot, I command you, end this torment quickly. If you know the truth, speak it." Poirot bowed deeply. "Madame, I know much, but not yet all." One confession more must surface. His gaze swept the circle, piercing, relentless. "One among you hides a secret greater than the rest, and that one already trembles." As though in answer, Mrs. Glenn suddenly sobbed aloud. "I cannot bear it. I cannot bear it any longer." She buried her face in her hands. "It is true. He came to me yesterday, Montague. He knew of debts I owed. Foolish debts. He said unless I spied for him, unless I brought him gossip of Lady March, he would expose me. I swear I wanted him dead, but I did not kill him." Poirot moved swiftly to her side, his hand resting lightly upon her shoulder. His voice, low and soothing, carried to every corner. "Courage, madame. You see, the truth emerges piece by piece. Soon it will form the whole picture. Already I perceive the design. Already I know who touched the poisoned sweet." He straightened, his little figure taut with authority, eyes glinting like polished jade. "Tomorrow I shall gather you all in the ballroom. And there, mes amis, we shall lay bare the crime entire." The company stirred. A collective shudder. Hastings, his pulse quickening, knew the signs well. Poirot had set his trap. And by this time tomorrow, someone's mask would be torn away. Chapter 9. The Trap. The following evening, the Royal Imperial's ballroom was transformed once more, not into a place of festivity, but into a theatre of judgment. The chandeliers blazed down upon rows of chairs set in a semicircle facing the dais. The orchestra's dais itself stood bare. The music stands cleared away, the polished parquet gleaming ominously in the light. The French windows had been latched firmly shut, yet the sound of the sea below came faintly, a constant pulse like the beating of a hidden heart. One by one, the company filed in. Lady March, imperious though drawn. Charlotte, pale and trembling, rent and resolute at her side. Iris Levon, languid but watchful. Sir Basil, sweating profusely. Mrs. Glenn wringing her hands. Doctor, Rathbone, grim and professional. Ashbury, taut with suppressed energy. Whitelaw, the manager, white-faced but composed. Inspector Graves presided at the rear, notebook in hand, ready to strike at the least word of confession. Poirot took his place at the centre, a small but commanding figure, Hastings at his side. He clasped his hands before him and bowed slightly. "Mesdames, messieurs, you wonder why I bring you once more into this room of shadows. It is because the truth hides here, as surely as the pearl was found upon this floor. Last night I promised you revelation. Tonight you shall have it." He let his words hang in the charged silence. Then he continued. We know Archer Montague died of strychnine, contained within one lozenge of his case. We know he offered a sweet to Mademoiselle Charlotte, who refused, and then consumed it himself. We know, too, that only a single lozenge was poisoned. That tells us something very important. The hand which prepared it had confidence that Montague, and Montague alone, would be its victim. A murmur rippled through the group. Iris shifted in her seat. Sir Basil muttered something inaudible. Charlotte clasped her hands more tightly. Poirot raised a finger. Consider? To slip poison into all the lozenges would be clumsy. Anyone might accept one. But to poison one only? That requires knowledge of Montague's habits. He always tapped the case, offered, and then selected the second lozenge for himself. Always. The murderer knew this quirk and relied upon it. Inspector Graves frowned. So whoever knew him best, précisément, Inspector, and therefore we must ask, who among you observed him often enough, closely enough to know? Already the list is narrowed. Poirot began to pace slowly before the dais. We have learned much of Montague's threats. To Charlotte, to Sir Basil, to Mrs. Glenn, to Lady March herself. He was a man who profited from menace, but menace alone does not point to the poison. We must consider the details, always the details. He stopped by the French windows. First, the latch. One bore a smear, a faint trace of chalky dust. That latch was opened secretly last evening. Why? To admit someone, or to allow escape? He crossed to the dais. Second, the panel in the parquet. Within, I discovered these with a flourish. He drew forth the cream-coloured gloves. Gasps circled the room. A lady's gloves, scented and stained faintly with powder. Powder which, when tested, contained traces of strychnine. Charlotte gave a strangled cry. Iris's hand went to her throat. Mrs. Glenn sobbed afresh. Poirot's gaze was keen. Whose gloves, do you ask? They're too small for Iris, too elegant for Mrs. Glenn. They belong to one whose vanity admits no imperfection, whose hands must be immaculate. He paused, his eyes gleaming. To Lady March herself. A collective gasp. Lady March rose half a step, colour flaring in her face. How dare you? Poirot raised a hand. Patience, madam. I accuse you of nothing. Yet, I say only, the gloves are yours. You discarded them because they bore the poison. But whether you placed it there yourself, that is another matter. The old lady swayed, then straightened with iron dignity. You presume too much, monsieur. Non, madame. I presume nothing. I observe. And I observe, too, that Montague's death was timed precisely to the Empress waltz. He had threatened a revelation at midnight, but he died 2 hours earlier, at 9 o'clock, on the very beat of the music. Ask yourself, who chose that moment? Who wished to silence him before he could speak? His eyes swept the company and came to rest upon Ashbury, the conductor. You, monsieur. You marked the floor with chalk. You stood nearest the panel where the gloves were concealed. You alone controlled the moment of crescendo, the instant when attention was distracted. And you alone would know Montague's eccentric habit with the lozenges, for you had been his companion often, in his clubs, his haunts, his late suppers. Ashbury's face darkened. Nonsense. I knew him, yes, but so did others. Ah, but others did not prepare the music to mask his death. You did. Poirot's voice sharpened. And more, you were the one man Montague trusted with his secret. You said he told you of a coup, a revelation concerning Lady March. That was your slip, monsieur, for how else could you know, unless he confided? And why should he confide, unless you were his confederate, his ally in blackmail? The room erupted in murmurs. Poirot raised his voice above them. You turned on him. You feared exposure yourself. Perhaps he threatened to betray you, to claim all the profit. So you poisoned the lozenge, planted the pearl as a distraction, and hid the gloves to direct suspicion. A brilliant arrangement, monsieur, but too neat, too theatrical. Like your music, Ashbury's baton clattered to the floor. His face worked convulsively. He deserved it, he burst out. The swine deserved it. He would have ruined me, ruined us all. Poirot inclined his head gravely. So, at last, the truth begins to sing, but the final note is still to come. He folded his arms, eyes glinting. For tomorrow, when we meet once more, I shall lay bare the crime entire, and the murderer will stand revealed. Chapter 10. The Reveal. The ballroom was once more arranged like a court. Rain lashed against the tall windows. Beyond them the sea roared its witness, as though eager to hear the verdict. Every guest sat rigid, the weight of 24 hours' suspense pressing upon them. Inspector Graves loomed at the back, ready with handcuffs. Poirot stood at the centre of the polished floor, very small, very neat, moustaches gleaming like twin sabres. He surveyed the assembly with grave courtesy, then began, "Mesdames, messieurs, we have spoken much of motives, debts, blackmail, secrets. We have seen lies surface like bubbles, but motive alone does not make the murderer. It is the means, the opportunity, and above all, the psychology, that reveal the hand he moved a few paces, hands clasped. Montague died from a single poisoned lozenge. To slip one sweet into a silver case is delicate work. The murderer needed knowledge of Montague's habit of always choosing the second lozenge. That narrowed our field greatly. Few observed him so closely. One who had dined with him often, seen him at his most habitual, that one would know." His eyes turned to Julian Ashbury. "You, monsieur. You were his confidant, his fellow in late suppers, his companion at clubs. You knew his habits. You orchestrated the very waltz that covered the fatal moment. You even marked the dais with chalk to secure your place, so that when Montague collapsed, confusion reigned." Ashbury shifted, his mouth twisting, but Poirot lifted a finger. "Yet, the gloves. Ah, they were the cleverest part, hidden beneath the panel stained with strychnine. Lady March's gloves. What better than to cast suspicion upon the grand hostess, to make it appear Montague had been silenced to protect her secrets? Such melodrama! It reeks of the theatre, of the stage. And who among us is theatrical? The conductor, the man who thinks in crescendos and flourishes." Gasps circled the room. Lady March stiffened, eyes blazing. Ashbury rose suddenly, voice hoarse. "He was going to betray me. He promised partnership, then mocked me. He said I was nothing but a hired fiddler unfit to sit at his table. He would have ruined me in his filthy paper, laughed me off the stage of life. I could not. Do you hear? I could not endure it." "Alors," said Poirot softly, "you slipped the poison onto one lozenge, certain he would take it. You planted the pearl to suggest a lady's trinket fallen, to draw the eye away. You hid the gloves, tainted with powder, where they would one day condemn the wrong person. It was a composition, monsieur, a symphony of deceit. But you forgot one thing." Ashbury's eyes darted wildly. "What?" Poirot's voice cut sharp. "You forgot that the smallest details speak. Montague's boast of revelation at midnight. You alone repeated it. Too eager, too careless. That was your false note. And once I heard it, the whole symphony collapsed." Ashbury sank back, his shoulders crumpling. "Yes," he whispered, "I did it." The room exhaled as one. Graves stepped forward, heavy hand upon the conductor's arm. "Julian Ashbury, I charge you with murder." Lady March drew herself to her full height, voice steady once more. "Monsieur Poirot, you have preserved my house from dishonour." "I am in your debt," Poirot bowed. "Non, madame, it is not honour I preserve, but truth. She alone matters. Montague was a man who lived by threats. In the end, he met a man too weak to endure them. Weakness is not excuse, but it is explanation." He turned to Hastings, who watched in quiet awe. "You see, mon ami, once again the little grey cells, they triumph. One pearl, one clock that lagged, one lozenge among many, that was enough. Always it is so. The smallest detail overlooked by others speaks the loudest to me." He straightened his cuffs, his expression serene. "Come, Hastings, our work here is done, and perhaps now, at last, we may enjoy a holiday by the sea, unless, of course, crime insists on waltzing once more." Chapter 11. The Reflection. The Royal Imperial had settled into uneasy calm. The body of Archer Montague was removed discreetly under cover of dawn. Inspector Graves and his men had departed with the sullen prisoner Ashbury in tow. Yet within the hotel the echoes of that fatal waltz lingered like the last strains of a melody. Guests, relieved of suspicion, made their preparations to leave, each with their own shadows, their own secrets, their own quiet gratitude that the net had fallen elsewhere. Hastings found Poirot in the lounge, seated with immaculate neatness in a high-backed chair. Before him lay a silver tray with a single cup of chocolate steaming gently. Not a hair of his moustache was out of place. "Well, Poirot," Hastings began, "I must say you've done it again. Though I can't help feeling he was a pitiful sort of murderer. Not at all like the hardened villains one imagines." Poirot inclined his head gravely. "Pitiful, yes, but do not confuse pity with innocence. Ashbury yielded to fear, to vanity. Montague was a blackmailer. Ashbury was his accomplice once, perhaps. When Montague threatened to turn upon him, his pride could not endure. Voila." The poison he sipped delicately. "But I tell you, Hastings, crime is seldom born of grandeur. More often it is the small weakness, the pride injured, the purse threatened, the heart scorned. That is why one must study not only actions but psychology. To know how a man thinks, that is to know what he may do." Hastings frowned. "And the pearl? I still don't quite see its place. Mais c'est simple, it was a diversion. Ashbury dropped it upon the parquet before the fatal dance, so that when you, mon ami, found it, suspicion would at once incline toward a lady. And when I discovered the gloves, it seemed to confirm the story. But too neat, too theatrical. Always beware when a crime plays to the gallery." He leaned back, eyes half closed. "Consider also the clock, Hastings. The ballroom clock that lagged 5 minutes. Why was Montague so preoccupied with it? Because he intended a revelation at midnight precisely, to time with Ashbury's flourish. But he died at 9. The murderer hastened the performance by 3 hours. It is always in time, in order, that men betray themselves." Hastings shook his head admiringly. "You astound me." "I don't know how you see it all." Poirot's lips curved in a small smile. "Because, mon ami, I look. Others glance, they assume. I observe, I think. The difference is profound." At that moment Lady March approached, upright as a mast in a gale, her pearls gleaming undimmed. She inclined her head to Poirot. "Monsieur, I thank you. The name of March must remain unsullied. You have ensured it." Poirot rose courteously. "I ensured only that the innocent were not accused, madame. But remember this. Honour does not lie in silence, but in truth. Guard that, and your name needs no defence." Her eyes flickered, but she bowed and moved away. Poirot resumed his seat. "You see, Hastings? Even now she would prefer the scandal buried, the memory hushed. But the dead, they demand remembrance. Montague was no saint, but his death, too, tells us something of life. He lived by threatening secrets, and so he died when one secret threatened him in turn. It is the eternal symmetry of crime." Hastings glanced toward the windows. The storm had passed. The sea lay calm and grey beneath a fragile sun. "Do you think, Poirot, we shall ever have a peaceful holiday?" Poirot smiled into his cup. "Mon ami, peace is not for us. Where men gather, there will be envy, pride, weakness, and so, crime. And where crime walks, Hercule Poirot follows. It is destiny." He set down his cup with precise finality. "But for today, let us stroll upon the cliff, breathe the sea air. Even the little grey cells must rest between their labours." And with that the great detective rose, buttoned his coat, and stepped into the pale light of morning, neat, composed, a small figure carrying with him both the weight of truth and the calm assurance of victory.